Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the webinar, Fluoride Applications. Is fast fluoride really better? My name is Dr. Susie Dracopoulos from 3M Oral Care Division, Australia, New Zealand, and I'll be your host this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Robert Carlinzi. We are very lucky to have him this morning. He's woken up especially early, all the way from Indiana. He woke up at 5 a.m. To talk with us today. So apparently he's been inspired by his own dental decay, and I know this for sure because Robert has actually told me this story. And this is how he became interested in dental materials or novel materials that could cooperate and enhance fluoride-based remineralization. And these materials ultimately became the patented functionalized tricalcium phosphate tooth strengthening systems presently found in several 3M oral care preventative therapies. Following a research faculty position in Indiana University School of Dentistry in 2006, he teamed with Dr. George Stuckey and co-founded Indiana Nanotech in order to further his research and satisfy his entrepreneurial spirit. 14 years later, he continues to develop innovative technologies, including the development of a tech-based application that supports better oral and systemic health outcomes. He holds more than 14 patents and has published in various scientific fields, including dentistry, chemistry, and material science. As principal investigator, he has received significant awards from federal and state level funding agencies, including the National Institutes of Health and State of Indiana, and continues to work with major dental manufacturers. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of Scranton and PhD in Chemistry Physics from Indiana University. Currently, he's an adjunct professor of chemistry at the University of Indianapolis, where he particularly enjoys teaching general organic and biological chemistry to nursing students. In the Q&A session, I just wanted to introduce the panelists. We have Stephen Langdon. He's our clinical specialist from the Oral Care Division. We have Aslihan Esroy, our Scientific Affairs and Educational Professional Service Specialist for Australia and New Zealand in orthodontics, and myself, Susie Dracopoulos, Scientific Affairs and Education Manager in Australia and New Zealand for dental.
So that was a great introduction. I'm just going to try to keep us moving a little bit. You don't need to hear anything more from me personally. I hope everybody can see the presentation here soon. If there's any issues, of course, please let me know. Technology is what it is. So hopefully we are all good and we got it going. So I just want to let you know there is a disclosure here. 3M Oral Care is sponsoring this educational course. Now, this presentation was prepared by me and it's authored by me, and I just want to let you know, again, Susie already mentioned it, but I am the inventor of the TCP technology that is found in several 3M Oral Care products, including the Pro White Varnish with TCP that I will be discussing a bit in this presentation because it matters with respect to how fast or slow a fluoride varnish can release. So here's 10 learning objectives in the spirit of the 10 Commandments. I don't know if anybody's seen Hamilton, right? I saw it. It was an off-Broadway. I saw it up in Chicago a year ago whenever we could still travel around pretty freely without worry about the virus. But now I understand there's certain versions of it, I guess, on Disney. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but pretty good musical. I was pretty impressed, even if you don't know the history of what's going on here in the U.S. in terms of the founding fathers and stuff. It's a really neat artistic expression of it, so pretty neat. Anyway, 10 learning objectives. You know, I'm not going to go through all of these in any detail right here, but you know, this will be covered during this presentation. So, and it has everything to do with, you know, where does the fluoride get held in the dental tissue, what poses the greatest health risk in terms of actual fluoride content or concentration, how long does it take to clear, all these kinds of things. Do fast release varnishes, do they produce better mineral? Do they produce a better antimicrobial experience? Do they produce more fluorapatite? And all these things we're going to be addressing. So there are 10 points there, and these will be covered. Some of these will be covered with the polling questions that we will be intermittently talking about. So as you guys are even more familiar with than me here in the US, the fluoride varnish recommendations have been revised there with the Australian Dental Society there, the association in 2020, you know, even though published an update on this saying that fluoride varnish should be used for people who have an elevated risk for developing caries, including children under the age of 10 years. And you no doubt you probably have seen this slide right here. Notice that the fluoride gel is not recommended for children under 10 years old. That's an interesting statement. It's probably, I mean, there's no really discussion here about it. Some of you already know probably why that may not be the case. In fact, you may even know better than I, but there are risk factors there with inadvertent swallowing, some kind of issues. I'm going to cover a little bit of that because that is important to cover in order for us to move forward. So even though fluoride gels are not used for anybody 10 years or less, or at least recommended by the ADA, it's important that we understand the basis for why that is, because that bears on the release of fluoride from different varnish formats. The fluoride varnish, though, of course, is recommended for all people at risk of caries and up to 4 times a year. And so it doesn't matter about your age or your any kind of pre-existing you know, issue. The fluoride varnishes seem to be pretty safe. But let's first take a glimpse back at fluoride. Okay, so here is going to be a polling question. And
yep, I got it.
Question.
Yep. Let me do that for you.
You bet.
Okay, here's the polling question. You should be able to see that. Which human dental tissue contains the most fluorine or fluoride? Please select one of the below.
Yeah,
just give you a few more seconds.
Enamel or dentin?
All right, I think I might just reveal the answers there.
Sure.
Can you see that, Rob? 15% said bone, 1% said cementum, and 75% said enamel, 9% said dentine. Do you have any comments to make?
I can't, yeah, I actually don't see the poll answers, but that's my issue probably, but that's good. So we're going to talk about it. Yep, that's right.
Yep. Yep.
Most of the fluoride actually is being held, well, I'll show you. Let me show you. I don't want to think that it's crazy. It is cementum, and I'm going to show you where that is. So that's interesting. It's in the joining material. It's not in the enamel, it's not in the dentin, and it's not in the bone. Just to let everybody know, fluorine is the elemental version. If you ever hear of fluoride versus fluorine, this is the issue, right? Fluorine is elemental, fluoride refers to anything ionic. If you want to have a more, a better term for this, it would be reactive. Fluorine is the 13th most abundant element on Earth. Okay, it's about 1 ppm in oceans. How convenient, although we can't drink the ocean water, at least the level there, could have served as inspiration for water fluoridation, although obviously it didn't. The methodologies to measure fluoride in the water came about later. Ingestion sources include foods, of course, and then of course you have water, and then topical fluoride dental products. That's of course accidental ingestion. But though that's the background, it's really important to know, especially if we're going to be applying varnishes to anybody that's still developing or that has a huge amount of growth processes still to be had anywhere. And anyway, if you're between the ages of 0 and 18, you're going to be growing considerably. It's really interesting that the fluoride, especially if it's ingested, is going to be pretty much taken up by this skeletal and dental system. You can almost bet on it. And there's reasons for that, right? The bone structure and of course the appetite, is particularly amenable to fluoride uptake. Older bones definitely have more fluorine just because over time, if you're eating foods that have fluorine, you're going to have that accumulation, that bioaccumulation. No surprise there. Otherwise, it gets cleared from your plasma through the kidneys and stuff, and that's the issue there. So this was the study. I think you can see at the bottom of the screen here, I have the reference. where they actually measured the fluoride content in human dental tissue of several different people, and these results here that have been published back in '94 here have also been consistent with even prior results. But here is where you show that fluoride ppm, you have just a little bit in enamel. So although you would think that enamel has the most fluoride in all of the tooth structure or bone structure, you know, in the craniofacial region, it's not true. The cementum actually has the most. It's almost as if the cementum is kind of like that stopgap, and that's where it's going to collect, especially as a secondary dentition is developing, right? Even before it erupts. So pretty interesting point there. But because we don't treat cementum, but we do treat enamel, it's important to look at where enamel is found in the mouth, in the enamel, right? So here we have enamel depth, and I have these two different scale bars here. You have 0 to 35 in this figure to the left, and you also have 0 to 300 in the figure to the right. Both of these are independent studies, one done in '56, one done in 1989, and they show that that enamel definitely picks up fluoride, especially if it's fluorosed. No surprise there. If you have the discolorations, the brown, maybe even black per se spots, well, that just means you have a higher fluoride content. But also, you can know that if you don't have fluorosis, especially in the right-hand graph here, you can see that with this blue marking here, it's labeled TF 0.1 and no fluorosis, then you're talking about the outer layers of your enamel having maybe about 1100 ppm of fluoride, and then it quickly dies off as you go deeper into the enamel. So this is really important because it shows you that the fluoride collects mostly at the surface, okay, the outer 50 microns really. Another study, okay, was showing that with respect to how quickly does fluoride react with enamel, you know, and this was done by Brudevald in another study, even 1 ppm of fluoride reacts rapidly with enamel. So you're going to figure that within 10 minutes, you're going to have 93% of whatever fluoride that you're administering to the teeth is going to be responding. However, and I say responding, and I have to choose my words carefully there, because about 50% of that fluoride is removed when it's brushed with water even, and abrasives even remove more fluoride. In other words, not all the fluoride that is delivered to the tooth is chemically bound and it's going to stay there in the event of just even physical agitation with a brush, water, you know, contacting, or, and we haven't even talked about that, an acidic challenge, which would obviously, if it was severe enough, of course, try to remove some more of that fluoride. So there's going to be this seesaw, this tug of war going on constantly. Our teeth cannot take in too much fluoride way deep into the enamel. You know, you can figure anywhere between 0 and 50 is where you're going to be looking at having the most protection without having all the discolorations and other attendant risks there that has. But then, you know, this is why, you know, one has to continually be exposed to fluoride. So I think that is an important aspect to, you know, to mention. With respect to the pharmacokinetics of fluoride, it's also important to know that it is absorbed in the body. Some studies on different you know, mammals have shown that fluoride absorption, 25% stomach, 75% intestines and stuff, and of course that then gets flushed through the kidneys. The problem becomes if you have too much ingestion or exposure of systemic fluoride, then you know the kidneys can start to have some issues. But even if somebody does swallow fluoride accidentally, and I think that this is important to know, like what if there's a child that says, oh, or a parent that says, I think my child just swallowed too much fluoride, what do I do? Usually it's filtered within 12 hours of the event, and this is usually peaks between 1 and 3 hours. So unless somebody is, you know, continually eating fluoride toothpaste, or you know maybe accidentally swallowed some of the fluoride from another format, maybe like a mouth rinse or something, know that as long as this is not a persistent activity, that it ought to be filtered within 12 hours of the event. However, if it's going to be too much, then there could be some issues with respect to your kidneys. I want to mention that some of the issues with systemic fluoride absorption via ingestion, you know, are manifest in different ways. So it doesn't matter how much we are swallowing fluoride. If we did, our saliva still secrete only about maybe a tenth of that 1 ppm of fluoride. So it's really interesting. We can't really ingest too much and then hope that that comes out in the saliva. That's just not the way it works. Insoluble fluorides do not get highly absorbed into the body. So like calcium fluoride, magnesium fluoride, all these other things, even fluorapatite, they don't get absorbed. But free fluorides would, like sodium fluoride, stannous fluoride, things like that. That's why if there is ingestion, there could be the concerns. Adverse effects, and this is really important for varnishes and also for gels, depends on the fluoride concentration and not the mass. This is really important. This is why there should be caution and there should be in-office care whenever administering a high fluoride topical, something that has 12,000 ppm or even higher, right? Or even you know, some of the prescription strength gels, and especially if they're acidulated, they have even higher rates of absorption. But adverse effects do depend on the concentration. Food delay can occur if you were to have a meal, for instance, and then there was an inadvertent fluoride treatment or whatever, but it only delays it. It doesn't reduce the fluoride uptake, but milk or calcium fluoride ingestion can counter those effects. So these are just some of the background information. These are great references. If anybody wants to have some of these references, I'm happy to provide them separately, because you know this is information that you probably have already been exposed to, but it's good to review, because this takes us back to, well, what is going on with the different fluoride varnishes or even gels? Why aren't they, you know, recommended for, you know, 10 years and less and all that? Just want to point something out here, because it's often glossed over, including by those researchers that are doing a lot of the systemic looks at where fluoride is being inadvertently absorbed in the body. Guys, we know that you can pass active ingredients through the mouth. We already know this. Anybody who chews tobacco knows this. If you ever had the cannabis oil, right, the THC oil, you're told to hold it under your tongue. You know, if you have a proper active, and you know, I don't partake in that, but I have tried it just because I wanted to see what that sensation was like. And the THC will lead to like a little bit of a buzzing or a numbing sensation under the tongue. So that's how you know that the oil that you know, purchase from whatever dispenser that you have is actually legit, and it's not just something where it's like, hey, we have all these oils. Yeah, but the oils isn't you know, doesn't have the right active, right, from the THC product that you wanted, that you desired. So some people, you know, swear that that can help with, you know, all different kinds of things, and that's fine. But just want to let you know, you can definitely sense that difference if you hold that under your tongue. So, you know, these things aren't new. The oral mucosa has been an environment that has been targeted for a long time in terms of delivery of drugs, including insulin. Okay, even some testosterone, and definitely some analgesics and antagonists as well. So like the opioid agonists or antagonists. So it's a very convenient area where you can get absorption of stuff. So it doesn't just have to go through the belly or your intestines in order to have any kind of systemic absorption. In the mouth, your sublingual region is definitely sensitive to absorption, followed by the buccal and the palatal. Just to let everybody know that your buccal mucosa permeability ranges between 4,000 and 4,000 times greater than the skin. So even if there's like issues, I saw recently that there was concerns about sunscreen being applied to the skin, and then they're discovering, this is published, I think, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that it's bioaccumulating in the plasma. So it's actually penetrating all the way through all the epidermal layers of the skin, and it is bioaccumulating. You know what? Your oral mucosa is at least 4 times greater than that of the skin. And so as soon as you know, developers of any kind of active want to try to improve that bioavailability or uptake, then they're going to add in flavors, polymers, surfactants, lipids, and mucoadhesives. All of these things are found in gels, and they're also found in toothpaste and varnishes. So these are things that we also have to take into account. So what is that fraction? It's about 7 to 10% of any kind of uptake that's found in the body. And this was done on rat studies, but it could apply to, you know, to humans as well. But you're going to find within the first couple hours, you're going to get your peak absorption. So basically what this tells you is if there is any inadvertent swallowing of any kind of fluoride, whether it's from a gel, toothpaste, varnish, or whatever, you can expect almost probably about 10% of whatever was ingested came through just the oral environment, not traveling all the way down the esophagus, into the belly, into the intestines, and then filtered through the interstitial fluid, blood, kidneys, and so on. So that's all the background on the pharmacokinetics of fluoride right now. We're going to start getting into now gels and varnishes, and this leads us to the next polling question.
Okay, here it is.
In general, yep.
In general, which confers more systemic absorption and therefore systemic risk? Please select one. It's either 5,000 parts per million fluoride gel or 22,500 parts per million fluoride varnish. And we're not allowed to vote.
That's right. Huh? I could even give hints if that helps, but probably not. I won't do that. I want your honest feedback.
Okay. All right.
Susie,
let's close that. I think we're finished. Let's share the results. The results are 65% of the audience has said 5,000 parts per million, and 35% has 22,500 parts per million with the fluoride varnish.
Well, that 65% is correct with the 5,000 ppm fluoride gel. So that's interesting. I'm glad we're covering some of this stuff because I feel like, it's hard to get this kind of information just, even as a repeated basis, even if we've already come across it before, but you know what, we're in practice and we just forget about it. Well, this is a great refresher. This is one of the reasons why you're here tonight, right? To get refreshed and to better understand what are the differences between fast and slow varnishes. Why is the ADA not recommending fluoride gels for those 10 and under? Well, it's because they confer more systemic risk. And this has implications for the viscosity of the topical fluoride. I'll get to that in a minute. These are the background studies that have shown that fluoride ingestion from gels does occur. These studies were done way back in the 1980s, and Extran and stuff would publish on this kind of stuff, and it was just amazing what they found. So regardless whether you had a 1.23% acidulated phosphate gel, as shown in that upper figure there on the left, or you had 5% sodium fluoride varnish, just because you have the percents there, it depends not only on the fluoride concentration, but it also depends on the viscosity. Viscosity, in my opinion, if that's a weird term, maybe you guys are very familiar with it, right? It's like molasses, right? Something is viscous, it's very molasses-like, slow moving. If it's not very viscous, well, then it's going to turn more like a water or some kind of fast-moving fluid. So the point here is that your normal plasma has less than 0.1 micromolar of fluoride. Ingestion of a gel, this is what Extran had measured back in '87, produced up to 70 micromolar of fluoride. Not fluorine, but fluoride, the reactive form of fluoride in some of the children whenever they received this gel treatment. That's a lot compared to, for instance, 6 micromolar. Yeah, it's still higher than 0.1 micromolar, but this is a lot less with this sodium fluoride varnish having almost 5 times the amount of fluoride. It did not allow it to be passed into the plasma at such a high rate. So this is one of the reasons why there's going to be some trepidation in recommending gels for less than 10 years old. But you know what? It doesn't matter because this can be with anybody. And I also told you it's not just about the swallowing that we have to worry about. We also have to consider any kind of inadvertent absorption that will occur through the oral mucosa, because absorption of fluoride will occur there. There's not much actually physical material that is going to inhibit that absorption pathway getting into the bloodstream there relative to having to go and travel down through the digestive system. So what about then, and this is a pretty interesting, those are older studies, and this kind of helped, by the way, those studies that I'm showing you on the left, that kind of helped buffer in a new approach and a new way of trying to deliver fluoride that wasn't really related on the acidulated phosphate gels. This was actually done to try to say, well, maybe a sodium fluoride varnish might be a good opportunity to be able to deliver some kind of protective effect while reducing systemic risks. And you guys already know one of the main differences between a gel and a varnish is a gel is less viscous, right? The varnish is more molasses-like. So you have the urinary fluoride here after 2 hours, and this was a more recent study. This is a compilation here, 3 different studies. These are very good studies trying to look at what the level of ppm fluoride was in urine. You can either look at plasma or urine for these biomarkers, and they found that that the most fluoride was found here for, well, that was delivered. Most of the fluoride that was uptake, or I should say emptied into the urine, was the highest for the 0.2% sodium fluoride mouth rinse, even though that has the least amount of fluoride. Next was the sodium fluoride toothpaste. That actually had about 0.6, but I guess the sodium fluoride varnish, which had, you know, more than 5 times the amount of fluoride, I guess is a little higher than that toothpaste. But that shows you that it depends on the flow properties of the fluoride topical that is being administered. A fluoride varnish then could potentially prove to be more safe, if you will, in terms of reducing risk than even a 0.2% sodium fluoride mouth rinse. That may sound crazy, but again, it's not just about the concentration we have to worry about here, it's about the modality. And so 40% more urinary fluoride is found with the sodium fluoride mouth rinse compared to the varnish. And then how does it compare with the 2% sodium fluoride gel versus even the ClinPro white varnish, which we mentioned at the top of the show, right? Guess what? There's a lot more fluoride in urine when a 2% sodium fluoride gel has been administered. So you have several studies that are looking at this, and so we should take pause and really come to understand that it matters on the viscosity of the product. And if that is not important enough, or maybe I haven't driven that concept home enough, well, maybe we could take a look at 1985. There was a couple of researchers that published in the Pediatric Dentistry Journal because they were very curious about, well, let's just take gels, but let's take a range in viscosity. We had a very high viscosity gel, something like molasses, all the way down to a low viscosity gel that would flow like water. And what they did is they loaded the trays and they treated everything the same, right? They tried to put in the same amount, all this other stuff, and then they gave it to their patients that they were evaluating in this observational study. And then they took back the tray after they administered it to the patient, right? And then they measured how much fluoride was there. Well, guess what? The high viscosity gel, it had, I don't know, about a little less than 7 milligrams of fluoride remaining. The medium viscosity gel, okay, so not yet water, somewhere in between molasses and water in terms of its flowability there, was somewhere around 7. But guess what? The one that really flowed pretty easily in the tray and was easily, you know, administered to the teeth and, you know, probably didn't stick very long to it, it only had about 1 milligram of fluoride remaining in the tray whenever they analyzed it. So the question is, why? Where did all the fluoride go that was in the expectorate? And they suggested that it's possible that a large fraction of the fluoride was swallowed. I hope that everybody can kind of see where I'm trying to lead you to here. This is a talk about fast versus slow varnishes. In order to get to that point, I'm trying to show you how the viscosity and the format, the preparation properties of a mouth rinse, a gel, a varnish, a toothpaste, all of this matters whether we want to try to reduce potential risk, especially for vulnerable populations. Anybody who has, you know, for instance, developing dentition, especially if you're less than 10. But these are some of the reasons why the ADA are not going to support the use of gels in children 10 and less, for instance. Okay, and just know that, again, the passage of fluoride into the body, going through the plasma or the urine, again, it's not just through the stomach or intestines, it's not through the usual way, it's also through, I guess it is usual if you want to think about it like that, it's also through the oral mucosa, okay? And that's going to confer probably about 10% of whatever absorption that is observed in the urine or blood. I think that that's important. So let's talk now about varnishes. The whole purpose of a high fluoride treatment was to prolong fluoride retention in the oral cavity. In general, this has been known since even before, like in the 1940s and even beyond that. But you know, surely it came about in the 40s, and there was just a whole, I mean, tremendous amount of research that just erupted all over. Yeah, there was general agreement. Fluorapatite is what you're looking for, and the next best choice is going to be like these calcium fluoride like reservoirs that form and then slowly dissolve. We've heard about this a lot, right? That's usually what you get in a fluoride only formulation. This is one of the reasons why the fluoridated water levels at 1 ppm, you're delivering sustained levels of low fluoride. But guess what? Low fluoride levels like 1 ppm and less, and you know, not just 1 ppm. If you have 500 ppm or 1,000 ppm of fluoride delivered in a toothpaste, that's generally going to lead to at least some fluorapatite formation. But the trick is to try to sustain low levels long-term, and then you'll be able to elevate, improve how much fluorapatite is actually being in the tooth, not just these calcium fluoride-like reservoirs, okay? So, you know, obviously there was water, you know, fluoridation experiments that showed all this. Again, in the 40s, all this stuff came to be. Topical stuff was able to be applied, and this was done in office whenever they were administering 500 ppm. The dentist or the practitioner would just, you know, dip a cotton swab in it and apply it to the teeth and then see every 3 months, right? That's what they were doing for their in-office prophylaxis. Major approach, though, evolved with this acidulated phosphate fluoride, and this was done in the 1950s and 60s. And Dr. Brudeval was the one who really championed this technology. And he knew that you were going to get these calcium fluoride-like reservoirs, but he was the one who really supported and promoted the idea, hey, look, that's fine. It doesn't have to be fluorapatite. Maybe these calcium fluoride-like structures will dissolve over time with acid attacks, with natural salivary action. And then once they dissolve, well, then you're going to have fluoride available, and of course it's going to react with the tooth. But of course we know that that may not be the case, especially if fluoride is absorbed through the oral mucosa, or if it's just swallowed anyway. Or if it's just cleared in any other manner. I mean, maybe it's stuck on chewing gum or something if you're chewing gum and then you get rid of your chewing gum. So there was some approaches that actually didn't necessarily like that idea. They understood what he was trying to do. He was trying to have a sustained level of low fluoride. That was the whole point of the acidulated phosphate. If we can't do it naturally, then let's just make these calcium fluoride-like structures. They'll dissolve over time. Well, another guy stepped in and he said, well, why don't we just make it all in one? And Brudeval, even his team, would apply cavity liner and even nail polish and varnishes after they applied an acidulated phosphate solution in order to try to prolong that effect. But it was a major improvement whenever the fluoride varnish all-in-one was developed, because it mixed the sodium fluoride in a rosin-based system. And the rosin-based system inherently allowed slow release. Guys, that was done in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. That became the original Durafact, and Colgate later acquired that. So that is the background, that is the motivation. We're trying to get sustained amounts of fluoride to be delivered to the dentition, because that's going to give you the best long-lasting form, i.e. fluorapatite. And that's where we are here now with slow versus fast release varnishes. So I'm not going to show you too many studies. I do have these studies. This is like one of the few laboratory studies that we have. And this was an unsolicited independent study. Actually, I think the study was done by the folks who also have the fluor protector S. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. Different fluoride delivery system, different, you know, I believe that's a polyurethane system, or some other, maybe it's a silicone system. The formulation has changed a little bit, but they looked and saw, well, we have all of these different fluoride varnishes in the market. Well, how do we know what is sticking? And so the ones that really release a lot of fluoride, if you look on the figure on the left, you have fluor protector up here at the top. That releases probably about 100 microgram fluoride per square centimeter after 4 hours. So that one, released quite a bit. Fluor Protector S, I mean, both of them. Then you also have the MI Varnish and stuff. The MI Varnish released a ton, 250. It actually reduced or, provided the most. Whereas all the other varnishes that you are typically familiar with, including ClinPro, including Durafat, all these other ones, they're more towards the low end, everything less than 50. Honestly, if we're talking about slow release, we want things to be less than 50. We don't want everything to be super high, because where is that fluoride going, right? Just like how the doctor showed that using a very low viscosity gel, it was inadvertently and had to have been swallowed, because where else would it go, right? Mass cannot be created or destroyed, right? If it's not going to be in the tray and it's not going to be in the patient's mouth anymore, then it's obviously been cleared. But these researchers found that despite the fact that you have a variety of different flow rates, and even if you have low amounts of fluoride being released over time, which is again what a varnish is intended to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a lower bound fluoride percent. In fact, ClinPro White Varnish in their study, and again, these are the guys who actually work with Fluor Protector S, found that ClinPro White Varnish had the most percent bound fluoride. In other words, the stuff that won't just be washed off with water, brushing action, or even some acidic treatments. That's the stuff that's going to be prolonged. And another study, completely independent, I'm not showing you those results, but you have the reference down here in the bottom right, showed that the ClinPro smooth in a statistically better manner enamel, roughened enamel, than a couple other varnishes did. So now here's another polling question. Susie, your turn.
Here we go. So the question is, do fast release varnishes lead to clinically higher fluoride levels in plaque or biofilm relative to slow release varnishes? Yes, no, or depends.
Yeah, now we're not talking about enamel, but we're actually talking about what's going to be in the biofilm.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's have a look. I'm just going to close that now and share the results. So 26% said yes, 43% said no, and 31% were undecided. They said it depends. What are your comments?
The majority, the majority has done really well. The answer is no. And of course, it is going to, depend in certain areas, but we have data that can actually demonstrate this. I love the fact that there was, I love these polling questions. This really helps. I mean, it's hard for me to, to gauge an actual interaction here with the audience. So this is just wonderful that you guys are able to do this. Thank you for taking the time and doing this and paying attention, because I know that this might be hard too. I know I'm giving you a lot of information. I do really appreciate this, because I can try to dial in and see where I can help, at least provide information. So this was a slide. This was a company slide, actually, or I should say a company data. This is way back here in 2009, whenever the ClinPro White Varnish was being developed with the TCP. This was an in-house study where they looked at varnish migrating from two surfaces. That's what this left-hand varnish data here plot is showing you. And the point of this is just to say that between 3 different varnishes, with the Enamel Pro and Varnish America, those are just 2 brands that are more of a high fluoride release. They did not contact teeth as well as the ClinPro White Varnish did. So ClinPro had almost 7 teeth here by 2 minutes, almost 10 teeth after 10 minutes, and then it still stayed about maybe 7, 8 or so after 4 hours. This was a patient reporting back where they felt the varnish had been contacting the teeth. So this is one of the benefits of having a slow release varnish, but that doesn't address the polling question that we just did. So we have to look at another study. This was an unsolicited independent study. This is not a company study. This is one done out of the University of Michigan Dental School. And they looked at, well, because there are so many different Varnishes, how do we, who do you trust, right? You're hearing marketing information. There's so many different options. Everybody has their favorite. Maybe they like the salesperson, or maybe they just like the company's ethos. Whatever they do, you know, some of the researchers in the dental schools are trying to find good projects for their students, and it's like, okay, well, there are a litany of different varnishes out here. We need to try to understand better why one is different from another. So in this particular case, they looked at ClinPro, Enamel Pro, and Cavity Shield. These are just two different varnish systems. Just to let you know, the Cavity Shield is one of 3M's varnishes. It's not a white varnish, doesn't have TCP in it. It was one of the first generation varnishes, and this is a slow release. So the ClinPro and the Cavity Shield are both slow release, while the Enamel Pro is at fast release. Well, guess what? There was no difference in the fluoride that they measured in whole saliva or centrifuge saliva. Guys, we're probably not surprised by that, right? And this is after, over a 24-hour period. Remember how I told you way back that the saliva can only deliver or only contain maybe, it's like 1/10 of 1 ppm, right, of fluoride. You're not going to be able to supercharge the saliva in order to drive a better effect. That's not going to be a good way. So these results with the whole saliva and centrifuge saliva probably aren't surprising. There's really no differences. Guess where there is a difference? In the plaque. And it's not just about having a slow or fast release, although a slow release system is definitely better than a fast release system, especially if it has an additional ingredient in it. This one has the TCP ingredient. That even helps sustain fluoride longer in the oral environment. And that's one of the reasons why the ClinPro white varnish is higher than even its analog. It's like TCP free, and it's like an orangish colored varnish. Analog varnish system, that's one of the reasons. But the point is, even if your Enamel Pro also has calcium phosphate, so if you want to take a look at slow versus fast, and both of these have calcium in it. In fact, Enamel Pro has a ton of it in it. I think it's at least several, a couple different phases supposed to form the calcium fluoride like stuff. It matters. It matters about the flow properties. So this is about not only the flow properties, if we were going to compare just ClinPro to Enamel Pro, but also if you were going to compare ClinPro to Cavity Shield, whether you have an additional agent in there that can help prolong the retention of fluoride in the oral environment. So this brings us to another polling question. And guys, there's only this polling question and one more. And we're getting through these slides, so there's not too many more studies. So
here we go. Let's launch this. Are fast release varnishes more effective in reducing pathogenic bacteria relative to slow release varnishes? Yes, no, or about the same?
Yeah, so now we're not talking about the tooth impact here. We're actually talking about, is there any impact in reducing any of the streptococcus mutans or lactobacilli, some of those key pathogens that we can measure and that we have, obviously we know, that are involved in primary and secondary decay.
Okay, I might just close that. Seems that most people have answered here.
Okay.
So let's share the results. So 20% said yes, 54% said no, and 26% said about the same.
You know what? Yeah, I really like the no, and I also like the about the same, just like even on the previous polling question, because it all depends on certain things. But we're going to go with no here, and I'm basing this answer on no to a recent study that has highlighted that. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. I want to go over 2 slides first because I want to remind you that yes, fluoride has an antimicrobial impact. This was discovered back, formally discovered in a published form, Journal of Dental Research by Dr. Bibby back in 1940. He noticed that even 1 ppm of fluoride could inhibit lactobacillus and streptococcus mutans growth. And you can add a little bit more fluoride to continue to reduce other metabolic functions of these pathogens, for instance, glycolysis or any kind of growth production, extracellular polysaccharides, which is EPS, or intracellular polysaccharides, right? Food storage, all these things, right? So if you're looking at on the top bar here, I have the fluoride ranging about 1 ppm, and then the orange is 50 to 250 ppm. The gray is 250 to 850. The yellow is 850 to 1500, and so on. You guys can see this. You can see that as the fluoride concentration gets higher, right? If it goes more blue, right? You're going from really light blue to this darker blue, passing through, this orange, this gray, this yellow. You're going to get more of a benefit. And it really becomes quite interesting that you start seeing the strengthening of enamel start to be, I have it on as the last two, strengthened enamel and increased enamel acid resistance, as the far two right-hand, components here, characteristics of fluoride, and obviously it's way better for more fluoride. But the fact is, you start to get these kind of benefits even at low levels, like 50 ppm. You start to have inhibited microbial processes. Maybe not growth at 1 ppm. I think, if I said that, it doesn't do good, but it definitely, 1 ppm can definitely inhibit glycolysis, for instance. 50 ppm is where you start needing to have more of a benefit, but still, that is the major point. So please remember that fluoride was initially designed to be an antimicrobial. And one of the reasons is, and this is a really busy slide, I don't expect you to fully understand this. I'm not even a full-fledged biochemist that works in this area, but this is like a diagram that's supposed to represent all the different metabolic pathways of Streptococcus mutans. What I want to just remind you of, because I'm going to be showing you results of this other independent study, is that, and you guys already know, the Streptococcus mutans is a beast, okay? What do I mean by a beast? And this is something that I don't know if you've been familiar with, introduced, or maybe you've heard about, but guys, Streptococcus mutans can synthesize every single one of its amino acids that it needs in order to survive. It needs protein, just like how even, I don't want to get off topic or anything, but even with the COVID virus, some people were promoting, the supplementation of zinc. Well, zinc is really important because zinc can help mRNA, which is one of those parts of the protein-making framework that our body needs in order to be able to fight viruses. So anytime you're feeling cold, like sickly or anything, everybody says, well, up your zinc level, up your zinc level. Zinc helps your body make proteins. Why do you need proteins? There's lots of reasons, but one of the benefits of the proteins is that it forms antibodies. And that's one of the reasons why, if they're promoting zinc to try to help you against the cold or the flu or whatever else, then that's one of the reasons. Well, here, this Streptococcus mutans can make all of its amino acids, and it's way better than our human body. We ourselves, there are about 9 essential amino acids, maybe 10 if you include arginine, but we only make maybe 3 of our essential amino acids. So we have to get other amino acids through dietary sources like beef, like soy, like things like this. Streptococcus mutans can do it all by itself. It doesn't need any supplementation. It has all the machinery already there to make all of its amino acids. This is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to address, to try to counter. It metabolizes more carbs than any other gram-positive bacteria, which are known to be usually pathogenic, and it has an abundance of proteases, peptidases, and exoenzymes in order to allow this to happen. This is one of the reasons why it goes crazy. And you guys already know that Streptococcus mutans really thrives in a dentin eating environment, not enamel eating. Let's leave that to the lactobacillus to soften it up and for it to populate the Streptococcus mutans. But once a cavity has formed within the dentin, yeah, now Streptococcus mutans is going to become a beast. So this is what I wanted to show you then, this study. It was just published this year, like maybe even a month ago, actually, Clinical Oral Investigations. Really interesting study, again, unsolicited, independent study. This isn't from anybody's laboratory, but it shows you that in this particular case, they were comparing 4 different varnishes, Durafat here in blue, Clinpro in orange, as the, if I may, the slow release or sustained release, while Embrace and MI Varnish had a fast release. Embrace has sodium fluoride, xylitol, and calcium phosphate. Boy, they thought of everything. They just thought of everything. Let's just dump it all in there. These are great key features. We're going to get some good action. Well, at baseline of 0, at months is down here on the bottom, you have whatever the microbial colony counts are of lactobacillus, right? They get reduced after 1 month. Okay, so you have the treatment after 1 month, then that's the ensuing population. Everything reduced, everything works pretty well. Okay, fine. What about after 3 months? How much lactobacillus remained? Well, they were, a couple of them are pretty comparable. Even MI Varnish and Clinpro Varnish, pretty comparable. A little better than Durafat, right? Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, Durafat was a little better than the MI Varnish and Clinpro, and definitely better than the Embrace, right? So the Embrace, even if it has all that stuff, just because you see an ingredient doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily work. You see that lactobacillus wasn't as controlled. But get this, this is the real clicker. Streptococcus mutans, the beast that I just told you about, which is so difficult to try to harness and to try to keep a hold of. They looked at lactobacillus and Streptococcus mutans. Again, you apply it at baseline. Of course, you did your baseline measurements of your colony counts of lactobacillus and Streptococcus mutans. After 1 month, you see what you have. Look at after 3 months, which one has the lowest? And so if you were to look at a Varnish system, that could actually provide you the best of both worlds, both lactobacillus and Streptococcus mutans. And oh, by the way, we already know that it stays within the plaque biofilm pretty well. Then you would say, well, according to these studies, all of them which are unsolicited and independent, you would recommend Clinpro White Varnish. There's nothing weird there, okay? But that's also because of some of its design. Susie, the last polling question, please.
Let's get that up for you. Do fast-release varnishes likely produce more fluorapatite relative to slow-release varnishes? Yes, no, or depends? We have a quick audience tonight, Robert. They're very enthusiastic.
Well, this is great. I mean, again, I really appreciate this. I know this is a lot of information.
Okay, I think we're almost done there. Let's have a look.
This is
the last one. Let's share the results. So 21% said yes, 65% said no, and 13% said depends.
I love that. It actually is going to depend. I like where everybody was going. You guys are really following along, especially with the no. The ones that said no are also partially correct. So, although I highlighted depends, I want to show you why. So if I were to look at mineral phase calculation, so there's a program and it's called this Visual Mintech, and anybody can use it. It's free to use. Scientists do use this. As more of a physical scientist who has looked at mineral phases and solutions and things like this, I've used this calculation based, algorithm to try to predict which minerals could form based on how much of the building blocks are going to be there. So if you load something with calcium carbonate or sodium phosphate or sodium fluoride, and you put all that together in a vial and you were to shake it up, and you were to say, well, what kind of mineral can I form? This is what you would get. And so this is my plot here that I wanted to show you. So you have a bunch of different calcium phosphate phases that could exist, including just regular beta TCP, which is actually the basis of the functionalized TCP. We just, functionalize it because beta, in our opinion, there are some defects in the structure that allow for us to tailor it. That's a separate discussion. But the beta TCP offers a unique perspective. You also have octacalcium phosphate, dicalcium phosphate anhydrous, dicalcium phosphate dihydrate, calcium fluoride, hydroxyapatite, and fluorapatite. Okay, so these are the standard calcium phosphate phases. If you ask a researcher in the field of this, says, hey, what mineral phase are you forming? They would probably give you one of these answers. Well, if you put all of these, we know the composition, right? We know the composition of MI Varnish, Enamel Pro, Clinpro, and Durafat, right? We know how much, when I say composition, we know how much fluoride is there. We know how much calcium is being added. I put those amounts into the calculation, into this secret, but it's not so secret because anybody can use it, this algorithm that could be able to calculate which mineral phases that would be expected. Well, Durafat, not surprisingly, would form a lot of calcium fluoride. It's a fluoride-rich system. Clinpro, because it has some fluoride plus a little bit of this other tricalcium phosphate system, okay, this functionalized tailored form, it actually produces quite a bit of fluorapatite and calcium fluoride, but less, you know. Enamel Pro, it has a bunch of calcium and phosphate, but it's a hodgepodge of stuff. It has all kind of phases that could be expected, including octocalcium phosphate, as well as calcium fluoride, even some hydroxyapatite and fluorapatite, as well as MI varnish. MI varnish does not seem to predict to have a lot of octocalcium phosphate. But the point is, all of these varnish systems, just based on composition alone, can be expected to produce different mineral phases. Guys, this is really important, okay? I did these calculations. I did them based on just the composition. If you're just looking at ClinPro and you can say, well, that's nice. How do you know it's fluorapatite and calcium fluoride? Well, we know this because of an independent study. I am not going to show, just because we're already at 6 o'clock, I was going to show you an animation, but I'm not going to show you that now. If anybody wants to see that, you know, you can even go to my YouTube link. It's even there, or 3M can send it to you. But I want to drive home this point. This was an unsolicited, again, unsolicited independent data that had come out of, it was in Eastern Europe actually. This researcher had looked at enamel treated without, meaning no varnish, and then with, i.e. with the ClinPro white varnish, and they looked at the X-ray pattern. Well, guess what? The X-ray pattern in this left image on the bottom is just regular apatite, hydroxyapatite. The one on the top is fluorapatite. So I predicted based on the composition, and I say but using this independent, you know, mineral phase calculation, that fluorapatite would form, and guess what? It did. And then you also have SEM images that show you have calcium fluoride-like structure. Some of this can look like calcium fluoride if you were to look at it under a high-powered microscope. And the mineral phase calculations also showed that you would have calcium fluoride-like structures. So if it's not fluorapatite or if it's not calcium fluoride, well, then you're probably not going to have a really robust system, because you don't have to worry about all these intermediate phases, because intermediate phases like octocalcium phosphate and any other thing could mean that you're going to lose that material just due to clearance. More recently, the white varnish is safe and effective. I wanted to, you know, share this because, again, this is unsolicited. This is way independent. I mean, this is part of a multiple prevention trial study. In this one particular case that was published here in 2017, I just want to let you know, in Navajo Nation, and here in the U.S., that's an area, it's a certain demographic that is definitely more prone to caries. They evaluated 479 children. They delivered over 1,800 ClinPro varnish treatments. The point that I want to make here with this study is that there were 0 adverse reactions. The sustained release system did not present anything that was going to give anybody an upset stomach. There wasn't any kind of weirdness going on with, I don't know, tooth discoloration or any kind of kidney issues, nothing like that. It's safe. It's definitely safe. This separate study, this has come out of Mexico actually, looked at what happens if you supplement 1450 ppm toothpaste with ClinPro. And they used the one, you know, with the, ClinPro with the TCP varnish. They found that there was better protection whenever the ClinPro varnish was included. Again, this was a clinical study, unsolicited, independent study. The preventive effect of the additional preventive effect with the varnish was 16% in primary teeth, and it really elevated for 36% in secondary teeth. And if you guys have already know about maybe rough approximations of how varnish is effective, the 36% is right there with what it would be reported anyway for any varnish. And I should say most of those studies have been based on Durafat, because Durafat has been the only slow release or any, that was the original varnish over the last 40 years, right? So this level is right there. This study, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm trying to move a little bit more quickly, and I apologize for that. Again, this just got published. This is a Quintessence International study. This is a really interesting study. They looked at those that had received orthodontia, because some of you obviously work in orthodontic clinics. Well, what happens if you give a varnish treatment after the orthodontia has been removed? So they took all these different students. They looked at the different treatments. They gave 2 different treatments actually. One of them was a mock-up. It was a varnish, but it had no fluoride in it. So they actually put something as a barrier on the teeth. And then they still allowed, the child, I mean, it was under 18 years old, the adolescent really, to still use the toothpaste, right? The 1450 ppm toothpaste. And what they found is that at baseline, obviously you're gonna have a little bit of white spot lesions. Here, the score of 0 on the far left would be the best, and then it would progressively get worse as you go from 1, 2 to 3. Well, baseline, yeah, there's some white spot lesions, but after 1 treatment, and then 8 weeks later, you can start seeing that there is a benefit. Of course, our white spot lesions, I mean, what this shows you anyway, and why there would be any effect in the orange, is that white spot lesions will naturally heal if you have adequate saliva flow. And that's why there's even like this 23% effect right there with the mock-up varnish, because they will heal, especially and more quickly in the presence of fluoride, like a fluoridated toothpaste. But if you have a varnish as well, like the ClinPro White Varnish that they used here, you're going to get an even better result. And that continued even after 16 weeks. So again, this wasn't like 16 weeks of treatments. It was, you just put on a varnish and you wait 8 weeks, and then you wait 16 weeks, and you take the photos, and then you evaluate them. So this is a pretty powerful statement. They also looked at the visual appearance, and they asked the patients and the dentist to evaluate the teeth. So even the patients had to evaluate their own appearance of their teeth after post-orthodontia after the 16 weeks. I'm not showing you the data. It is available, of course, through that reference, but they quote that there was considerable clinical improvement for the ClinPro varnish versus the mock-up varnish. So I'm going to end, this is my last slide, but I think that this is important because there are differences between fast and slow release. Just to let you guys know, I am a fan of the Colgate DuraFat varnish. I am. It was the original varnish system, right? It promotes calcium fluoride-like mineral, which is okay. It can also do some fluorapatite, but it is clinically proven. This was the original development. This was the alternative to the acidulated phosphate fluoride system since the 70s, okay? But improvements have been made, and not all improvements are bad, but we have to be discerning. So just like how we started with the 10 learning objectives, here we have 10 great benefits of the ClinPro White Varnish. And I'm saying, which varnish is it? It gives a white varnish. It's a slow release. It has the greatest fraction of bound fluoride, meaning fluorapatite-like stuff that's not going to be dissolved or washed out with brush, water, or even acid attack as easily. It'll have the highest fluorapatite content. It'll have evidence of fluorapatite on enamel, greatest clinical reduction in the pathogenic bacteria, the highest fluoride content found still in the plaque biofilm. No adverse effects. It still has great anti-caries benefits in the dentition anyway. Clinically, we see that. And even post-orthodontia remineralization and cosmetic appearance is really good. This is a great system. I mean, this is one of the more complete systems. It is a slow system, if we must call it that. But I would be challenged, and of course I'd be open to it, to have any other varnish, especially a fast release varnish, that can deliver all of these while still being safe. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why we have to be concerned about the fluoride content. And this is one of the reasons why even with the gels, you can't get that. So anyway, I know that's a lot. I know it's a little bit after the time. Of course, I'm open to your questions, but I really appreciate your time and your attention this evening. I know I gave you a lot of information. I will be more than willing to answer questions here and even offline too. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That's the end of our presentation this evening. Before we move on to the Q&A, I again would like to thank you again for getting up early for us this morning. It's been a very fun-packed presentation, a lot of information there, a lot of scientific evidence backing everything you're saying. It made it easy to understand, so I really do appreciate it, and as I'm sure the rest of our audience is also appreciating that. So now we're going to move over. I'm just going to leave your camera on for me, Robert. Let me see if I can show my screen. So the live Q&A, if you haven't already popped your questions into the Q&A or the question panel, please do so. We're going to have Stephen and Alison Aslihan, joining us now. So they'll be joining us with their webcams, and we'll get started with answering some of your questions. So let me just pop my webcam up. All right, are you there? Can you give us? Are there Stephen and
yes,
Aslihan?
Question. So I'll start with this one. Is there an ideal amount of Climpro varnish that should be applied to the teeth? Is more better? Should it be a thin coating on the teeth or a thick coating?
Well, in my opinion, based on just what I understand, and admittedly, I'm not a clinician. I don't work with it as much, but you would try to do. The whole point is to try to get those anterior two surfaces first. So if it goes on thick or thin, as long as you have that amount, I think it's what, like a third of a milliliter amount, or that like 30 milligrams or so. I think that there's even an amount. You can be rest assured, of the varnish, that it will actually drift. And that's why one of the studies that I showed you shows that the varnish itself will migrate anyway. And it is sticky enough that it's just not going to be cleared from the oral cavity. So you don't, so if obviously you don't want giant clumps sitting on the front of your tooth like you have food in there. But at the same time, don't worry about if it's too thick or too thin. Just make sure your anteriors are coated. Know that you have, especially with all these studies, you're not going to have huge risk factors, right, for accidental ingestion. It is a slow release system, so you're not going to get a fluoride bomb in the oral environment. It will drift over time, even over the course of hours, to be able to get to those two surfaces, including, if possible, in between the teeth. It's a great question, but again, as long as you're contacting the bulk of the anteriors or the occlusal, if you want to do the occlusal, or even in even the lingual, but that's going to be a little bit wet. That's going to be really challenging with that varnish. I understand that. So I would do your best with the anteriors, and then of course, if you can get certain trouble spots, definitely do that. But it's not going to matter too much. It can be thick or thin. Just don't need globs of it on the tooth. That's a good question. It's a really good question.
Awesome. This one's an easy one. Does this product need light curing?
No.
Not the varnish, no, not the Climpro varnish. We do have another product. Yeah, we do have another product, Climpro XT, which is a resin modified glass ionomer, and that does need curing. Stephen, did you want to add to that one?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, yes.
Yeah, it's possible that perhaps that question may have come about because there is another product in our range called Climpro XT varnish, and as much as I disagreed with the name that they gave it, it was described as such or named as such, and it can cause some confusion in the marketplace. The XT varnish is a resin modified glass ionomer, but somewhat different to your normal restorative GICs. It's somewhat more resinous. It certainly cures clear. It is light cured, but it's a site-specific material. It's more of a coating rather than a varnish, hence why I never liked the name. But it is a somewhat different material, but that's the one that does require light curing. The white varnish, of course, it does not require any sort of polymerization whatsoever.
That particular product works well in sort of isolated teeth where you might get some recession and you'd needed some to desensitize a particular tooth for a certain amount of time. So yeah, you do see that that works better in those situations.
Post-orthodontic treatment, perfect up in the just above the bracket area where they've been removed. They work quite well there. They generate an inhibitions, I should say a demine zone directly underneath the material itself, so it's very easy to apply. But it is an interim material. It only lasts a certain space of time. It's variable based on how the patient may brush or how vigorous they are in brushing. but it has its applications, but it certainly doesn't replace the broad spectrum varnish that has been, or the varnishes that we've been discussing tonight.
Awesome. I'm going to shoot to the next question. How does Climpro 5000 differ from tooth mousse?
All of the Climpro 5000. Well, now we're talking about toothpaste, right? Yeah, it's a whole different animal, man. I mean, you know, first of all, the Climpro 5000 has 5 times the amount of fluoride in tooth mousse. So Climpro 5000 is really that. It's, I mean, you can't get a better product that will give you the extra attention you need if you have a high risk caries profile, or, you know, you say caries, but it's also for erosion, sensitivity, all that stuff. So then the number one thing is 5,000 ppm versus whatever tooth mousse is, which I think is less than 1,000. And then of course it still has the tricalcium phosphate component. Tricalcium phosphate has been optimized. Just like how I showed in mineral phase calculations, you can expect a better mineral outcome, i.e. fluorapatite and calcium fluoride formation out of the Climpro white varnish versus, for instance, MI varnish or Enamel Pro varnish or anything else like that. The Climpro 5000 will do the same thing. And also, and critically, the tooth mousse has a calcium phosphate ingredient that is sourced as a milk protein, okay? And this milk protein, that's fine. I mean, milk proteins are generally designed to build bones in babies, okay? But what happens with that protein, which is often not discussed, is that it fails under acidic conditions. And acidic conditions, and what do I mean by that? Milk curdles whenever it's in contact with vinegar, for instance, or citric acid. In fact, I have YouTube demonstration videos of this. I do this for my students in nursing just to try to show them some differences in just milk and proteins whenever I'm trying to educate them on this. The same holds true for the CPP, ACP stuff that is in tooth mousse. It's not going to be robust against acid challenges. It will curdle, it will spoil, it won't be as effective. The Climpro 5000 doesn't, you don't have that concern with that. So the TCP works great under all pH environments.
Thank you. That's great to know. We've got a lot of thank yous coming in, Rob, and great presentation. Another question, how important is saliva pH in relation to fluoride release from Climpro varnish?
You know what, that's actually a really good question. The pH will matter, and you can expect a better release rate if you have a neutral pH, okay? And why I say that is because it's going to be a more stable environment. Fortunately, whenever fluoride varnish is applied, it's usually applied in a neutral environment. It's not like somebody was just sucking on a lollipop and or drinking a pop and then had a hugely acidic event. So I think that that's important prior to the application. After the application, again, the varnish is not susceptible to pH dissolution as strongly as some of these other varnish systems are, especially the fast release, because how you get fast release is you start adding in different components that can help break down that varnish system more quickly. Climpro varnish does not have that. So although all things will break down eventually under acidic conditions, and depends on what somebody's going to do. I mean, if you're going to be drinking 3 orange juices nonstop, you're going to break it down. But you're not recommended to do that after you just had a varnish treatment. I bet your mom and pop would be really pissed knowing that they just paid for a fluoride treatment, and then the child is all of a sudden going to drink stuff, 5 minutes afterwards. So the best thing here is that even after you have that application, if you can wait as long as possible, at least half an hour, at least an hour if we can. I'm trying to be reasonable. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we have kids, right? We understand how ridiculous it is to tell them to not chew on something, even if they lick the walls or something and start stimulating the saliva, going. But anyway, I'm being funny with that, but not very. But the point is, over time, as long as the varnish is not going to break down, it's a little bit more usable and it can prolong its reach to different tooth surfaces, you're going to be okay.
Thank you. We might be able to squeeze in 2 more questions. Some fluoride applications are supplied in tubes or single dose. Is there any advantage or disadvantage in this delivery system or the efficiency of the fluoride application?
You said it's applied as a slurry, and what is this? This is a paste or a gel? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I might be a little louder. So some fluoride applications. So we're talking about the tubes versus the single dose, and whether there is
the Varnish.
advantage,
Yeah.
yes, of the delivery system.
I don't think there's going to be much of a difference. I mean, you know, and again, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm sure we have panelists here that would actually know better than I. I mean, as a clinician, maybe there's like flow properties or mixing properties that might be different there.
I suppose
We'll
what they're probably
get phase separation
in the tube
over time. So hence why the tubes are less likely to be used these days. I think Colgate recognised that, of course, and went to a unit dose system as well. So although less expensive, you've got no way of being able to control the quality of the material because of that phase separation over time. That's why they've got a short shelf life for it. So there is reasons why everything's gone away from the tube to the unit dose format. That very reason alone.
That's right. Yep.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Any more there, Az?
Yes, there are a few more. I'm going to keep going till you tell me to stop. How many applications of Climpro are needed to heal white spot lesions, and how often? Every 3 months?
They can be applied every 3 months. I think it's going to be dependent on the lesion, depending on the person's situation. Like me, I have a history of cavity. I mean, I haven't had a cavity in 15 years, right? But my brother never had cavities growing up. I always had the cavities, and you know, it's one of those questions where, you know, and we both had orthodontia, for instance. It all depends on how somebody's natural bioenvironment in that environment is going to be, and their oral care regimen. You know, I would expect, and this is really important because I know that there is a tendency to try to fix white spot lesions immediately after orthodontic treatment. I know this, the microabrasion, I know it. People want it now, we want to look good, we want to impress. Fortunately, now we have to wear masks, nobody can see your mouth. So now you can all adopt a minimally invasive dentistry approach where we can take the long game and we can say, look, this is something that, you know, because here's the thing, if you start etching a tooth, and I'm not saying it's bad, but I am saying that there could be undesirable side effects of that, just like with anything. And you're not going to get that enamel back. So in the research community right now, and this is going on globally, there's a huge push for what's called minimally invasive dentistry. And what that means is that you do the least amount of damage to the tooth and you wait as long as possible and you use your topicals to try to get the result that you want. And so you have to be in it for the long game, just like how we showed with that post-orthodontia study. They waited at least 16 weeks and they still continue to see benefits of repair of the white spot lesion and also visual appearance. I would recommend you still getting the varnish treatments, you know, if you're going to repair certain lesions like that, at least every 6 months. Why not? Until that lesion is gone, right? And, you know, dentists have the, you know, of course you have your x-rays, you have your Diagnodent pens, you have all your different devices. You'll be able to understand. And of course the dentist still has his eye. And the hygienist has, you know.
It also depends on what your patient's doing as well, what they're eating. You know, you might have had a different, the quality of your saliva might be different to your brother's, even though your brothers, you know, you might have a buffering capacity. You know, there's all sorts of reasons. It's multifactorial. So it really comes down to the individual case and what the dentist thinks is appropriate for that particular patient. Or the healthcare worker. It could be the hygienist there as well. Yeah.
This might be an easy one or it might be a tricky one. What allergies or medical conditions need to be considered prior to applying Climpro?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on why, you know, I don't know if there's anything.
We can get the answer to that. There is some documentation if there is any allergens to anything. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't know of any. Do you remember those, Stephen, by any chance?
I have never, and that's why it's important that I showed that one slide, even with the Navajo children.
Yeah, you probably
479. not one of them had an adverse event of any kind, including, for instance, they included any kind of allergic reaction to the varnish treatment. I don't know. I mean, I think that would have to be a very special case.
I'm certainly not aware of any historical reports on it as such. Yeah, we have an amazing database in terms of these types of things, any adverse effects, and everything is reported. So I'm not aware of it. No, if there was anything, it would be extremely rare. Yeah.
Extreme. Yeah. So very, very low risk, I would think. Mm-hmm.
Right, one more, Az, if we've got one more question.
We've got a few more. Climpro 5000 toothpaste is now available in Australia. Would you recommend this in conjunction with Climpro white varnish?
Yes, I would. Absolutely, I would. I absolutely would. I especially recommend the Climpro 5000 as a nightly toothpaste treatment, just a daily, nightly, treatment. Of course, it all depends on your individual situation. I mean, everybody.
Exactly.
I don't know. But whether you have caries, erosion sensitivity, whether you're trying to remineralize white spot lesions, whatever the situation, if you have orthodontia, you should be on it. I mean, that's just a no-brainer, because no child can, or even adult with braces, can perfectly get their mouth clean. I mean, the plaque traps there are just incredible. You need the most protection you can, especially in that kind of environment. So yeah, but I think that the varnish is an in-office thing, right? If you're especially if you're still growing, if you're an adolescent, you're a child, the child is still growing, let's just protect it for as long as possible. Mm-hmm.
And I know I saw this question. Might be a really quick question. I might be able to squeeze one more in. I think the question was, if I can find it, what is the youngest age Climpro can be applied safely?
Yeah, I think even the U.S. Preventive Task Force here in the United States has even said upon the eruption of the first tooth. That's what they said here in the United States. I don't know what it is in Australia or New Zealand, but which is really interesting, because in the US, there is no caries indication on a fluoride varnish. So even though there's no caries indication for a fluoride varnish here in the US, they still say it's okay and should be recommended as soon as the first tooth erupts. But that's just based on my US knowledge, I guess, in that.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Stephen and Susie, for answering those questions. We do have quite a few questions we were unable to answer, and I squeezed one more in there at the end. We are pretty much out of time, so Susie, I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, just let me see if I can move my screen over to the last one, which is, here we go. Just a big thank you again to Rob. And if anybody wanted to contact us, here are our email addresses, our phone numbers for myself, Aslihan, or Stephen. Also, if you're interested in any more 3M free webinars or free CPD, please go to our website, 3m.com.au/dental_education, and please fill in your survey. Let us know what you think and what you want to know more about next time. Again, a big thank you for getting up early. Go have your coffee, Rob. Enjoy your breakfast. And thanks everybody for your attention
Thanks so
this
much,
evening.
Rob.
Good night.
Yes,
everyone.
Thank
Good night,
you.
and good morning, Rob.